BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Over the years on the food programme, I've encountered lots of unusual foods, from wriggly weevil larvae to porcupine liver. But I don't think I've felt the need to ask this question. What do chicken feathers taste like? I ask because it came up recently at a serious event on the future of food.
Hi everybody, and welcome to the 2025 British Library Food Season on eating the future of food.
Polly Russell, founder and curator of the British Library's Food Season. And in a session on radical ideas for the future of food, a couple of entrepreneurs with design backgrounds took to the stage and started talking about eating feathers.
I just saw this problem in a global scale, that we consuming chicken, but we throwing away feathers.
This is Sarawat Kitty Banthorn, originally from Thailand, a former student at London's Central St Martin's and co-founder of Kera Protein. And he had an important point to make. Since the 1960s, global chicken consumption has increased more than tenfold. And one of the many consequences of that agricultural and dietary shift is waste. Lots of it, including feathers, which, as the other founder of Kera Protein explained, needs to be put to use.
The protein's just sitting there, and it could be converted into an edible product. Yeah, we're kind of killing two birds with one stone in a sense of, increasing food security whilst also solving waste issues.
Tom Washington there with a radical idea and an inevitable pun. Europe alone produces around 3 million tonnes of waste feathers, and I admit I've never thought to ask what happens to them. The only food culture I've come across in which feathers are eaten is the Inuits. A traditional Greenlandic survival food involves packing dead seabirds into the carcass of a seal and leaving it to ferment buried underground for months. So, all the fat and the protein, feathers included, breaks down into a funky, ammonia-rich food called kiviak. But that's not what Tom and Sarawat have in mind.
So the scale of the problem is huge. I mean, chicken feathers are currently thrown away. They're either incinerated or end up in landfill, so they pollute the air or the ground. And farmers, particularly in developing economies as well, they don't know what to do with them.
Once you identified the problem, how did you go about thinking that feathers could become food?
So basically, each chicken has about 10% feathers. Inside the chicken feathers is 91% protein. So we use a technology called enzymatic hydrolysis. Basically, we use the enzyme called keratinase, digest the actual feathers until we get edible form of the protein.
It's broken down into a powder. It's very similar to how you use animal hides to make collagen, but this is keratin. It's the same process. You break it down with enzymes, and then it's dried out into a powder.
So what do you have in your hand?
This is the powder that's extract from the chicken feathers. So it has been done in a lab for over 35 hours using the enzyme to extract and until we get the powder form.
What I'm holding in my hand, this very thin sachet of the powder, which is about the size of a passport, how many feathers would it take to make this?
I would say 100 grams. It made of from 5 to 6,000 feathers.
So in terms of applications, this is an experiment, a project. There's no approval yet for this to become something in the supply chain?
It's not at the moment, but we're working towards that, because this will fall into novel food, which is we need to submit the application.
There's something called feather meal at the moment, which uses hydrolysis of just heat to break down the feathers, and it's fed to animals. But to be honest, it's really a filler, and some animals can have allergic reactions to it, and it's not a complete protein. By using enzymes, we're able to extract a far more complete protein, and it'd be far more beneficial for the animals. However, it requires the investment and the right affordability calculations and systems and the kind of scalability to make it viable. But that is something that we're talking to manufacturers with now, and it's potentially a big future, particularly when considering the scale of the problem, because it's all right it being integrated in small quantities into human food, but to actually really solve the scale of the feather waste issue, you need a big scale application, and that comes through meeting these different industries. So agriculture would be a huge one.
Sirawat Kitty Banthorne and Tom Washington of Kera Protein talking with me at the British Library's food season. Now, whatever happens to that idea, and whatever our personal reactions to the idea of edible feather protein, it's a helpful illustration of how farmers and scientists, engineers, entrepreneurs and designers are attempting to innovate our way out of the numerous problems linked to how we produce and consume food. In this edition, we're going to be showcasing a selection of what I think are the most exciting and impactful food innovations underway around the world, including those identified in our very own BBC Food and Farming Awards, more of which later. But first, we need some context. Over to one of the leading thinkers on food systems, climate and the environment, Professor Tim Benton. Tim, why do we need to urgently change the food system?
That's a good question, Dan. Why does the food system need to change? Well, it needs to change on two principal fronts. One is that of all of the things that humans do, the food system contributes to the most amount of unsustainability, whichever way you look, whether you're looking at pollution that arises from excess nitrogen use, or whether you're looking at plastic pollution, whether you're looking at land use change and cutting down rainforests and impact on biodiversity, or in particular, whether you're looking at climate change. And particularly as we are very close to, if not actually passing at this moment, the 1.5 degree Paris Agreement target of climate change, above which we have collectively decided that that's dangerous territory for humanity. We are very close to driving past that, and 30% of our emissions come from our food system. So wherever you look, the food system's outside impact on the planet is huge. And if we are going to live sustainably in the long term, in balance with nature, in balance with equitable climate, we have to change it. And of course, it's not just about our impact on the planet, it's also our diets and what people eat. And if you look around the world, whether it's in the rich world or increasingly in the poor world, poor diets coming from eating the wrong sorts of things, grown in the wrong sorts of places, in the wrong sorts of amounts, processed in the wrong sorts of ways, are increasingly underpinning dietary ill health around the world. So whether from an environmental perspective or a human health perspective, we need to change our food system, and urgently.
One of the arenas in which that urgency is being turned into action is through the world's biggest environmental award. Held in Stockholm, now in its 5th year, the Food Planet Prize was set up to champion ambitious ideas capable of reducing the negative impacts of the food system on the planet and on people. Out of the thousands of nominations they receive, one winner is awarded €2 million to invest in their innovation.
The Food Planet Prize is here as a contribution towards a transformation to a sustainable, safe, stable, prosperous food system for the future.
Professor Johan Rockström there, director of the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research, developer of the concept of planetary boundaries, and a judge in the Food Planet Prize in his call-out for nominations last year. That produced a short list of innovations covering many of the big problems Tim Benton mentioned. They're also fascinating stories, so it's worth hearing from a selection of their nominees, starting with a project that's trying to help farmers grow food in a hotter climate. And it's based on a mind-blowing and only recently discovered relationship between plants and fungi. That's the sound of the thundering geysers of Yellowstone Park. It's an extreme environment of scorching soils, and it's where this story begins.
There are these geothermal soils, just very hot soils where magma chambers are underground, so steam comes up. There's heavy metals in these soils. They can get up to 70 degrees Celsius or more. And there is a small plant community that lives in these soils.
So this is an extreme environment, really, for plant life.
I didn't know that plants could, until then, I did not know that plants could survive at those temperatures. And that is probably, I'm going to say, up to 20 C higher than what agricultural crops can tolerate before they start wilting and dying.
This is Rusty Rodriguez, CEO of a company called Adaptive Symbiotic Technologies, based in Seattle. 20 years ago, he paid a visit to Yellowstone to research those plants, and he left with a question. Is there something those plants can teach us which can help us grow food in an ever hotter world?
Keep in mind that when we started this project, there was already a 60-year effort that had been underway to generate climate-resilient crops through genetic manipulations. And they were unsuccessful because the idea was that plants do everything on their own. But it turns out the reality is that there are no macroscopic organisms on this planet that do anything on their own.
In researching how some plants are able to tolerate extreme temperatures, Rusty realized the focus needed to shift away from the plant genetics and instead ask, what's inside the plant? For those growing in the hot soils of Yellowstone, it turned out to be a particular type of fungi. And it was the symbiotic relationship between microbes and plants that was making their survival possible.
There's one class of microbes among the symbionts that are fungal, known as fungal endophytes, because they live inside the plants and they don't grow out into the soil. So they want to be in between cells in the roots or in the leaves or stems. They can be in different places. But they have a tremendous impact on the ability of plants to adapt to stress. And in Yellowstone, it turned out that all of the plants we looked at, and we looked at probably 200 plants from throughout the entire park, all of them had the same fungus inside of them. And we were able to take it back to the laboratory, and the fungus we could grow on artificial media in the lab, and we could grow plants free of the fungus, and then plant it, and you grew up plants without the fungus. When we did that, neither the fungus or the plant could tolerate temperatures above 38 C. Mm-hmm. And then we reintroduced the fungus back into the plants. They regained their heat tolerance and could grow at 60 C.
What is happening in that interaction between those two different organisms?
So the short answer is it's almost embarrassing how little we know of the mechanism involved, even though we have studied it for like 20 years. Yeah. But what we do know is this. The fungi go into the plants and they reprogram the gene expression patterns in the plants. And they affect at least hundreds of genes, if not more, that get upregulated, downregulated. They just completely shift what the plant does. And that's just without stress. So when you throw stress on, then the plant then has the ability, for whatever reason, to be able to tolerate that stress. So the fungi are acting really as like global regulators. If we are looking downstream at agriculture and food systems and food security of the future, we have to stop thinking about the plant as an individual, start thinking about plants as complex organisms that involve other organisms and what we need to ensure is there for them. And in this case, we have libraries of these fungi now from different places. We know where to get them, how to get them, and we've been, over the last 20 years, been developing commercial products that can be applied onto plants. You can generate a climate resilient crop by just simply inoculating it, wait a day, and it's good to go.
Who's using it and where, and what are the results that they've reported back?
So most of our activity has been in North America, and dominantly on corn and soy, because those are the dominant products there. We see excellent drought tolerance for agricultural crops, different species, increased yields and increased yield quality as well. But we realize that the need for these types of products really lie elsewhere in India and in Africa and in the Middle East, where they are confronted with water stress and heat stress all the time. We were able to get funding initially from USAID to go to India and work with small farmers there. And over there it was remarkable because we saw very significant yield increases, around 50 to 60% yield increases on their dominant crops that we worked with there. And we also saw that the fungus increased the nutrient use efficiency of the plants, so they needed less fertilizer. And we just started with a World Food Program sprint grant in Jordan as well.
You mentioned USAID in India. Has that now come to an end because of the policy decisions that we've seen?
Yes, actually, our grant was canceled. But I have to say, within a month or so, an anonymous philanthropic entity came in and offered to cover the rest of the grant. And I almost cried when we got the phone call. It was very impactful, and we are at such a pivotal point in India. We're at that inflection point, ready to expand and really seed in there. So this has been fantastic on that. But yes, the demise of USAID will impact these types of activities now around the world.
And just to take a step back and just do the big picture, why do we need this?
Well, climate change is not slowing down. In fact, it looks like it's accelerating. And it's pretty clear at this point that collectively we lack the political and social will to address this issue in a meaningful way. So it's going to get hotter, it's going to get drier. And this type of technology is, it's not only going to be needed, it's going to be required in the coming years. So food security that we are so accustomed to and comfortable with and take for granted is at great risk because of climate change.
Rusty Rodriguez of AST on the powerful symbiosis between plants and fungi. The food system isn't only being impacted by climate change. As food systems expert Tim Benton mentioned earlier, it's also one of the drivers, chief among which is an input that has helped farmers multiply crop yields around the world for the past century, and it's helped feed huge populations: synthetic fertilizer. But the production of these fertilizers through the so-called Haber-Bosch process requires a huge amount of fossil fuel in the form of natural gas. As a result, 2.5% of all greenhouse gas emissions come from this process. So the question another finalist of the Food Planet Prize asked is it possible to decarbonize the manufacture of synthetic fertilizer? And if you can answer with a yes, it's no exaggeration to say it becomes possible to transform not only the food system, but also the planet. And the inspiration for the potential solution, well, it comes from the skies. During a storm, when you see lightning, you're witnessing a process containing so much energy, it triggers a chemical reaction that can fix atmospheric nitrogen into compounds that plants can use. Over to inventor Gustav Forsberg.
In this lightning, there is a plasma caused, which is the fourth state of matter. So it's when the gas is heated sufficiently to dissociate the molecules, breaking apart the atoms in the nitrogen molecules and in the oxygen molecules. And then these recombine into NOx, nitrous oxides. The lightnings, they cause a reasonable amount of nitrogen for certain plants to grow, but we are intensifying this to make fertilizer.
To find out if it's possible to replicate that process, Gustav founded a company called Nitrocapt. Based north of Stockholm, its mission is to make the fossil fuel-dependent Haber-Bosch process redundant.
Of the carbon footprint originating from a loaf of bread, it's the largest part. It's more than 30% comes from the nitrogen fertilizers. So that is the problem we wanted to address and make this technology able to operate from a renewable electricity.
And you say 2.5% of greenhouse gases. 2.5% you'd argue is a big deal. Can you just explain why?
Well, just as an example, it's about the same level as the entire aviation industry. And people understand that that is a big impact.
The principles behind this way of producing fertilizer aren't new. In fact, they predate the Haber-Bosch process. But in an era of cheap, available fossil fuels, it didn't take off. What Gustav has done is revisit the idea with the benefit of a century or more of other technological advances, including green energy, microwaves, and, with insights from NASA, a way of creating a pressurized environment in which the process becomes more efficient.
There is a special plasma reactor, which is kind of a little compartment, a little vessel that we are heating with microwaves. And inside that little vessel, we have the nitrogen and the oxygen gases, and we let them dissociate, just like in the lightning, and then form this NOx. And when this NOx comes out, we put it into water, so it makes nitric acid, and the nitric acid we can then convert into nitrate fertilizers.
With renewable energy, this process not only decarbonizes fertilizer manufacture, it also takes away the control of an industry that's mostly in the hands of 4 companies and a small number of regions, the impact of which was felt by farmers when Russia invaded Ukraine, triggering increased fertilizer costs, helping to drive up food prices.
It does not need any remotely produced inputs, so we can actually make small regional units that can produce fertilizer resiliently and self-sufficiently for a region, securing food production also in periods with geopolitical tensions. And that has been incredibly important discovery by us, that this is actually desperately needed in the world, not just in Europe with the experience of the war in Ukraine, but as well in other parts of the world. We have learned from people who have contacted us that this could be a very important solution, for example, for Africa, because it's very difficult to bring in fertilizer to the interior of the African continent, whereas we could actually make small units producing nitrogen fertilizers and allowing countries to improve the yields and actually become self-sufficient in food production.
Gustav Forsberg of NitroCapt. This year's Food Planet Prize also featured innovations dealing with major problems at the other end of the food supply chain. In China, the amount of food left uneaten in the hospitality sector is so huge, it's estimated it could feed at least 50 million people each year. So what can be done?
Hi, this is Yu Xin from WWF China. I'm leader of the food work in China for WWF.
Yu Jian is overseeing an initiative called Pride on Our Plates. Active in 6 cities, it's bringing together restaurants, government, environmental foundations to bring about awareness among staff and customers. They believe food waste is intricately linked to China's deep food culture, based as it is on generosity and a desire to offer abundance. So as well as information and education, the initiative is also helping businesses redesign their menus.
We jointly work to make the best use of those leftovers before they cook one dish, but to reinvent a new dish to utilize these leftovers. We work together with the restaurants to see, for example, if they can develop some small portion dishes for the customers so that the customers wouldn't overorder to all the dishes that they would like to eat.
Yu Jian and the Pride on Our Plates initiative, which has seen some of China's restaurants reduce waste by 20%. Now, let's turn to an innovation aimed at solving another of the food system's biggest challenges, the shortage of water.
So we go through a lot of water a day, all of us, and we're kind of running out.
For more than 30 years, Richard Sturzaker was an academic and one of Australia's leading experts in soil science. Now he's working with farmers in Africa, finding ways to help them avoid a water crisis.
A lot of the world's food is produced by irrigation. It's incredibly important for the horticultural crops, the nutrition-dense crops as well. And almost all the water we can get our hands on, a little bit goes to drinking and households, but most goes to irrigation. That's where it goes. And we have no idea how well we use it. Now, if you think of a kind of a distribution of farmers, when it comes to irrigation, you've got 85% of the irrigated land is in low and middle income countries, small areas. And then there's this long tail of, big irrigators, and 95% of the science and the tech goes to that 10%, and almost nothing goes to this big group. And it's partly because measuring water in soil's been so difficult. You'd think we can put a man on the moon, but we can't measure water in soil. Or let me put it another way, we can, but not in a form that a farmer's going to actually do it. So what do we do?
The breakthrough is a simple piece of kit, one half so small it can be hung around your neck on a chain, whereas the other half goes into the ground. At the end of a cable, two pieces, almost like the shape of cork in a wine bottle.
Sure.
That looks like chalk.
Sure.
Two of them. Yeah. So that's one part. That's one component.
Yeah. Now you bury that in the soil, and that white part is like an artificial root. The soil immediately tries to pull water away from it, and it holds it back. And this is what a plant is experiencing all the time. It's got to pull water out of soil. Now, one of the problems with all the sensors out there is that it's actually not hard to get a measurement of water in soil, but every soil is different, and so the number needs to be calibrated for every place you go. And you can't do that unless you're logging and looking at trends and all that, which smallholder farmers aren't doing. Our sensor gives you a color of blue if you shouldn't irrigate, and blue means blue regardless of your soil. Essentially, we're making a language for people to talk about water, and that language works the same for everyone. So you can say to your neighbor, what color are you? What color are you? What should we do? Farmers have got a lot to say about water. We've never been able to talk about it before. We can't see it. The surface is dry, but what's going on deep down there?
A reader where the coloured lights are displayed is the small dongle a farmer can hang around his or her neck.
You just press this button and you tap the wires on, and it says you need to water this plant. And we can we'll put the water on, and immediately we can say, oh goodness me, it's gone green. And we could water it further and it'll go blue. The farmers just get it. They know what a good plant looks like, but they're guessing what's down below. Picture this situation. When someone builds an irrigation scheme or just puts all the canals in, at first people are happy, but then if it's not maintained, the canals crack a bit and the water doesn't get to everybody. I can tell you that wherever you spread water, conflict is not far behind, because they become winners and losers over water. And in those situations, people's behavior becomes opportunistic. If I don't know when the water's coming, I'll just take it. And what you find out is that people use more than they need. That's how you think when you're thinking opportunistically. But when you put information into a group of people, suddenly you get to this kind of flip point where people say, do you know what, we're all better off to cooperate. Everyone's better off when you cooperate, because it's a shared resource.
Richard Sturzaker of the Virtual Irrigation Academy on how a simple device is changing the language of water. Finally, let's hear from a former winner of the Food Planet Prize, an organisation founded in the 1970s in the United States, which is asking a really ambitious question. If we could go back 10,000 years to the origins of agriculture, could we have taken a different path? One that would have been better for the planet and better for people. Most of the world's calories come from annual crops, such as wheat, rice and maize, and because they're annuals, humans became trapped in a cycle of having to disturb soil, sow seeds, irrigate, fertilize and harvest, year after year after year, all of which involves huge amounts of energy and labour. It also requires a constant battle with nature, because more than 90% of the world's plants are perennials.
My name is Tim Cruz, and I am the chief scientist at the Land Institute in Salina, Kansas. Perennial is when plants grow for more than 1 year, multiple years, often hundreds of years, but even 5 years, whereas annuals start from seed every year. Interestingly, almost all of our crop plants are annuals. But in actuality, you go out into natural systems, and sure enough, perennials are overwhelmingly the most abundant life form of plant.
And whereas annual crops are mostly extractive, in that they take away from nature, perennials can often end up contributing to ecosystems.
A huge consequence of perennials being common is that soils, as we know, develop. It really, really requires these deep roots infusing a lot of carbon, a lot of photosynthate, the plants that photosynthesize and pump sugars and energy down into soils, feeds this incredible community of microbes, feeds this incredible community of arthropods. It helps build soil structure so that air and water can come in and out of soils. There's so many things that perennial roots do to build soils. It's not so far as to kind of say they are the rule. I'm not sure that we would have soils like the ones that we farm today if perennials did not dominate.
So is the idea at the Land Institute to harness those natural systems and figure out if we can actually feed ourselves in a more significant way with perennials?
Our thinking is, what if the crops that we grow are perennial? What if they actually are in the same ecological niche as nature's, species before agriculture? Would we have crops that actually build soil, sequester carbon, take up nutrients, prevent weeds from coming in? Because lo and behold, these perennials are doing what natural ecosystems do, and that is appropriate the resources at the beginning of spring. It sounds simple, but we've been at developing annual crops, for 10,000 years. And it's a fairly ominous idea to think of now reinventing crop species so that they are perennial. And the Land Institute has embarked on a number of crop species. We're developing a perennial sorghum, a perennial wheat, by crossing currently existing annuals with perennial relatives of those crop species. But we're also working on domesticating already existing perennials that show a lot of promise because they naturally present high levels of seed production.
Already in development is a perennial rice, a crop that will grow without much intervention for 6 or 7 years. It's labour saving and also helps to trap lots of carbon in the soil. Another perennial crop is kernza, a relative of wheat being grown by farmers in the United States and elsewhere, including Ukraine. And it's showing lots of promise.
There's many ecological benefits that are appearing with kernza, and the main goal right now is to improve its productivity. I will add that we're not interested just in stopping, though, with these perennial species. In many ways, it's giving us a menu of plants with really different functions that we can start to piece together to form really functional intercrops or polycultures. And an example of that with kernza is that we've planted it very successfully with the forage legume alfalfa, or lucerne, actually, in the UK. They get along famously, and the lucerne is a heavy nitrogen fixer. We have actually now achieved kernza production over 4 years with absolutely no synthetic fertilizer or manure input, and the soil is actually more fertile at the end than when we started. And it is simply restoring roots in the ground, adding a legume, and improving a soil that had been degraded over 100 or 200 years of annual agriculture cultivation.
Chief Scientist at the Land Institute, Tim Crews, on what we can learn from systems found in nature. The winner of the Food Planet Prize this year, by the way, was NutriPact, with its lightning-inspired approach to producing fertilizer. So my question to you is, which other innovations are out there? Which projects are you aware of that also deserve recognition? And that's where the BBC Food and Farming Awards come in. We want to shine a light on inspirational work linked to the UK's food supply chain, work that's tackling the big food challenges closer to home. And to find out what they are, let's hear from a former judge of the BBC Food and Farming Awards and now editor of the weekly food industry newsfeed, The Trim, Julia Glotz.
I have a list as long as my arm, but there are a couple that I would highlight. One of the big issues that's risen to the top of the agenda for many food companies in recent years is security of supply. Can you reliably get your hand on the raw materials, the ingredients you need to make your products and supply your customers? It's as basic a question as you can get in food, and we can't take it for granted anymore because of climate change, but also because of geopolitical tensions. Food companies are having to take a long, hard look at their supply chains and try and find ways to be more resilient to shocks, to be less vulnerable, to ensure they have that supply. And when you look at security of supply, it really touches everything. It touches climate change and environmental destruction, but also political uncertainty and trade disruption.
So we need nominations around issues of resilience and food security. What else, Julia?
Public health is certainly right up there as a priority for many food companies. Poor diet has a devastating impact on human health, and it is absolutely vital that the food industry finds ways to genuinely support people to make healthier choices and get the nutrition they need to support their health. But people are much more interested in health and nutrition than they were in the past. They are asking more searching questions about what is in their food products. And that in turn is prompting companies to take this much more seriously and to look at what they can do to play the most positive, the most constructive role they possibly can.
As with the Food Planet Prize, the work of our previous finalists is a good way of understanding not only the problems with the food system, but also the potential solutions. They give us reasons for optimism. So let's hear from a couple of them.
Hi Dan, it's Deanie from Zest, previously the Wonky Collective. Last time we had the privilege of speaking, and we have been up to a lot in the last year. So last time we were speaking, we were looking at how we could help food manufacturers to redistribute surplus ingredients. So every year in the UK, 4.6 million tonnes of surplus food is wasted across the supply chain. And we are building technologies to empower food manufacturers to take action against this waste. So where we were last year was redistributing ingredients, which is one piece of the pie. And since then, we have received funding. So we've received a £1.9 million grant, which we've also match funded in partnership with Nestle and a few other partners. And we are building our full tech solution using AI to help these food manufacturers take action against food waste. So what we do in a nutshell is we integrate our technology directly to the food manufacturers' production systems. We track their waste, we recommend improvements, and we also then redistribute any unavoidable surplus. So it's basically a smarter, faster, more commercial way to track and reduce food waste in your supply chain.
Deanie McGrath of Zest. Now, let's head to West Wales.
Hi, I'm Franjo. I'm one of the founding members of Carrymore, which is Wales' first regenerative seaweed and shellfish farm. We've been going for about 5.5 years now. We started this with the aim to do our bit for climate change, as well as to regenerate the oceans, as well as creating jobs for the local communities, especially in the coastal areas of West Wales. We have expanded not just by growing seaweed and shellfish for food consumption, but we've also partnered up with companies that make bioplastics from seaweed. But we've also started a huge project in creating a biostimulant. So what our aim to do with that is to help farmers move away from agrochemicals. So what we're trying to do is bridge the gap between sea farming and land farming by making biostimulants from seaweed.
Francois Bears talking to me from close to St David's in West Wales with his take on replacing synthetic fertiliser, and in the case of Carrymore, the answer is seaweed. So if you are an innovator trying to bring about a positive change to the food system or know of one, we need to hear from you. Please go to bbc.co.uk food awards to read all the details, including the terms and privacy notice. There are 7 other categories to take a look at as well, including Best Food Producer and Best Drinks Producer. Nominations close at midday on Monday, June the 30th. So don't miss this opportunity to highlight important work that all too often receives little public attention. For the last word, over to someone who works closely with food businesses across the UK, Julia Glotz.
There's a lot of innovation happening, and my message to food companies, big and small, would be it's important to not just do this work behind the scenes. You have to share what you're doing with the wider industry. It's so easy to feel defeated by the scale of the challenges we face at the moment. If you are working on something exciting, if you're trying something, if you're experimenting in a way that could help others in the food industry, we need to hear about it. This is not the time to just quietly do this work behind the scenes. Please share what you're learning, share what you're working on. We need all the inspiration we can get at the moment.